think that when we first met this subject, which was when word came from friends in South Africa that there was a play that had been drawn from Cantemba's short story called The Suit. I remember reading in a newspaper a very short resume of the subject, and at once it seemed an unusual and powerful human situation, and at once I said, we must get this play. The play came here, Marie-Hélène read it and said, yes indeed, we must do this right away. We were going to do a season of South African plays because we've been very close to South Africa for such a long time. This must be done, and Marie-Hélène began to do a new adaptation, freely, based on the short story of this situation, and what the play that we did in French with South African music was the human situation, which there had been perhaps 100 million stories about the relationships between couples, whether it's a Japanese couple or an English couple or a French couple or an African couple. This interests humanity permanently. As long as there are men and women, people will want to know what happens in a couple, and every variation has been given except this. For the first time, here was a new story. The man whose anger because his wife is unfaithful takes a form, his punishment takes a new form. And we're amazed. Here is a new story on an old theme. So, with this new adaptation, we worked on it. And the closeness to South Africa was using South African music. We did this in the booth, then it went on a big tour, and it made an enormous impact everywhere. And we were very pleased. But behind that, there was always this feeling that whatever we have done in this theatre, the Bouffe du Nord, over the years, in French, we've always felt that part of our essential mission is to play it on tour, not just to the little French audience, but to audiences of different cultures, because we started with an international centre, and the international centre was to bring together people of different cultures to us, and then go towards them, opening to different cultures. So of course, the idea of this going from French into the most international of all languages today, which is the English, has always been a natural movement. And this remained. We talked about it until one day it was Marie-Hélène who said, I have a strong feeling now, this is the moment. Because we had 6 or 7 years before tried preparing a version in English, and we worked on it, and we didn't feel the moment had come. And she said, this is the moment, and I feel we can do it differently. That was all. But as we developed it, many strong influences began to play on this subject, including the fact that the composer, Frank Kravchik, who's worked so closely with us, and Marie-Hélène, had done with the Magic Flute a big tour in South America. And there they were confronted with the incredibly close relation between the human situation and how that is affected by living in dictatorship. Cruel, ruthless dictatorship, which was the South Africa, not of today, not of the South Africa when we first did the version, but the South Africa of Cantemba. And then it began to be clear that the social and political conditions in which this very talented man discovered he had a talent for writing and found with a cruelty that had very few equivalents, he was not only under a censorship, which has happened in Russia, in Eastern Europe, in China, all over the place, but the brutal thing for a young writer, he was forbidden ever to be published in his own country. This was unbelievable. This in the end killed him. He drove to drink and then died through this pressure. But what for us became clear was that to have this strange idea of a man punishing his wife could only have come into the mind of somebody in that tremendous hot pressure cooker or oven of this terrible dictatorship called apartheid. And so out of that we began to see that every aspect of it took on a different meaning, and through its universal nature it no longer became in a simplistic way just about South Africa. Through South Africa it related to the people living before, during and after today in brutal dictatorships. And because of that, we began to see that if one today has the responsibility in the theatre of showing the increasingly brutal side of human life, we have an obligation to every audience also to show that this isn't a reason for everyone to be desperate and commit suicide, cut their throats, but to realize that hope and courage have a real meaning, and those can only be discovered if, and I always come back to Shakespeare, as Shakespeare did in every single play he wrote, he shows the worst, the ordinary, and the sublime, all within one context. And this was something that's so important that we search for it wherever we can, so that I just today write this simple phrase, which I first said in this theatre, which is, when an audience comes to a theatre, it is exactly like going to a doctor. You need to leave the doctor feeling better than when you go in. Mm-hmm. Otherwise he's a bad doctor. If he doesn't give you a new sense of life and courage, he's a terrible doctor, even if he's a great technician. And if he looks at you and says, "You're finished, hopeless, go away and die," he may be a great doctor, but he is a disgracefully rotten human being. We have that same responsibility. And for this very strange reason, in beginning to rehearse this with Frank Kravchik, who had become so close to us through the work on the Magic Flute, he began to discover, very surprisingly, that the purest of romantic classical music was truer to this subject than if we did the naturalistic thing of playing the correct African music of the time. And so within this, there is a musical mixture which doesn't seem to the audience like a mixture in which there is Schubert, in which there is Bach, and there is pure South African folk song, all of these coming together because at that moment the audience is not thinking critically and analytically, "Oh, what's that music? Where did I hear it?" The relation with a horrible situation from one point of view is also touchingly human. And so there is an understanding. So the audience, instead of just sitting there shocked by the behavior, can feel them, feel closer to them, can feel deeply the worst and the best of humanity within this very concentrated story. So that's the answer to all your questions.